In the darkest worlds that ever were, the only thing that brings light are stories. Those stories are kept in one place, the tiny bookcase.
Hello, explorers of the Sacred Library. I'm Ben.
I'm Nico, and you are listening to the Tiny Bookcase.
We've got 3 more short stories for you all. But first,
and most importantly, I'm sure you'd like to know who's with us this week. This fiction writer has achieved some really cool stuff, like winning the Sunburst Award and being a finalist for the Lambda and Nebula Award.
their debut novel is coming out in June this year, and it's titled Wendy, Darling. It's a lush feminist reimagining on what happened to Wendy after Neverland.
It is our pleasure to welcome A.C. Wise. Hello.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here.
Brilliant. So you are based in Philadelphia, but you've won a Sunburst Award. Do you come from Canada originally?
Yes, I was born and raised in Montreal and lived there for first 21 years or so of my life. And I've now been in the United States for about 20 years. So getting close to half and half.
Get half and half. Do you feel like there's gonna be a flip moment when you have the majority in the States?
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I still always think of myself as Canadian first, I guess, because, that's where I was born. But I did recently become a dual citizen. So, again, getting closer to that dual identity.
What's Philly like in person? I know Ben and I are both big fans of the show It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Sure
so our idea of the place is a little unusual.
I think it's a really wonderful city. I feel like it gets overlooked just being so close to New York City and Washington, D.C. I think a lot of people tend to forget about it. But there's so many great museums here. There's so much great food here. It's a very walkable city. I'm, really happy being in this area. So,
I was there very briefly for it was all of 40 minutes. I think we were flying from DC to where was I going? Louisiana. I could not remember. Where did I go? But yeah, we did a weird little flight exchange. But it was it looked nice through the windows, gotta say.
Yeah, I mean it gets much better than the airport, I promise.
I, however, have not been at all. So that sounds idyllic, but have there been any sort of like fairly serious pandemic restrictions on that?
I mean, everything did sort of shut down for a while, as it did in many places. I'm lucky in that actually I'm out in the suburbs a little bit, so we've got space around us, and it was, much easier to kind of stay isolated and stay away from other people. And I'm also lucky in that I was able to work from home the entire time, so there was really no need to go in and interact with other people face to face, which helps keep everybody safer. So that's definitely been a good thing.
So we've been talking to a lot of writers this season and posing pretty much all of them the question of how has the pandemic affected their work? As you say, most people work from home in that profession. Did you find yourself to be more or less productive during that?
I think I'm sort of weirdly the same level of productivity, but maybe just in sort of different blocks of time. When I was regularly commuting into work every day, I would take the train. It's about an hour train ride each direction. So I would be able to, get some work done on the train, say, or, set aside a little bit of my lunch hour to do some writing. And obviously that's different now. I can kind of, set aside like the block after work when I know I'm, I don't have to get on a train and go anywhere, or I can just, set aside a big chunk of time on a weekend. And do my writing then. So it didn't really change, I think, the overall amount that I was writing or reading, since I also do a lot of review work as well. So reading is also sort of a part of that work for me. But it just sort of, shifted at the times of day that I do it, I guess.
That sounds incredibly healthy. You sound like an extremely well-adjusted person, and I think I need to find the secrets to unlock that a little bit. But,
it's all an illusion.
It's an illusion. Yeah.
Making us look bad.
Well, okay, I think it's probably time for some stories, so let's get to it. Nico, you're actually going to be going first this week because I'm fairly sure I went first last week.
Oh, must I?
And the prompt you'll be performing is Fortified.
Fortified. Ingrid! Ingrid, focus! The world swims back into view for Ingrid Allensdotter, or at least the mead hall does. Her hands are stained, her fist curled so tightly around the handle of her hatchet that the knuckles shine white through the Saxon blood coating her forearm. Her interest hangs on them. Too long. They are ridges to her on the back of great Jormungandr, breaking the water's surface as his coils tighten around Midgard. Ygritte, help us! That voice. She knows it. It belongs to a friend. The mead hall swims once again into focus. With it comes dread and sorrow. Ygritte knows it's too late for her. For all of them, truly. Her heart says that Odin watches, that Hugin and Munin carry to Asgard on desperate wings news of their plight, and soon the Allfather will send his spear, or perhaps his son, to carve through the enemy hammering at their door. The door. God's the door. A group of a dozen or so fisherwives and tunic sewers huddle against the doors, their bodies adding to the strength of good Nordic wood. The hammering against them sings a tale of sorrow. The sound of so much force against them means there cannot be many left to occupy the invaders. The pleading eyes of Bodil Sigmundsdottir are fixed on Ygritte. They well with tears unbidden yet flowing freely. Each of them crashes against the hull of her cheekbone and threatens to sink the ship of her courage. Her voice has fallen quiet. She is afeard. Ygritte knows in this time that she has marked herself as a leader here. It was not training, nor love of war that caused her to snatch up the hatchet from the woodpile at the hearth. Not conviction in Baldur's name that let her carve so viciously the round-helmeted assailant who would have made her his plunder. It was by the grace of her own panic that she had separated the halves of his throat, to let his bellowing pour forth as a torrent of gore, bubbling with the screams that would never be born. Now, she was the only killer in the room, far as she knew, though who could say what mischiefs the crones had achieved in the heady days of their youth. She may be, on their side at least, the only killer left on this inhospitable rock they called home. She processes at last the pleading for aid, and her grain-hefting muscles coiling like serpents, hefts one end of the mead hall's long table to butt against the wall. The women struggling look up to her as though she is Lady Sif, but she is no hero and she knows it. She is, in this moment, a terrified, blood-soaked pagan. Little more. But she has strength enough in her arms to move the table, to wedge it against the doorway. Many of the women clamber across the broad wooden boards, or scurry beneath to add their force to the sliding furniture. It shifts like some great behemoth. The door bursts open a fragment, and the sounds of battle pour in from outside. Screams, roars, the clash of steel against steel. The metal armor of the Saxons gleams in the torchlight, unnatural and new. Their eyes are wild and their tongues wag, like wolves worrying a rabbit's warren. With one last heave, the door is forced closed. A crunch calls through the hall, and what remains of a Saxon's gauntlet leaks what was once fingers through its folds. There is no time for breath catching, or even fear. Benches and buckets and firewood alike are gathered and are thrown upon the table. A mound of hope built of scraps holds the door sealed firm. They are in their own suit of armor now. Their wooden carvings of the gods mount high and stand stalwart, defenders of the noble hall. Not easily will these weak-chinned men make slaves and war wives of their women. They are not peasant folk, ready to be stripped of their freedom and lives. They are Nords. Anything these Saxon bastards want will be bought at the highest of prices. The fear of not knowing is the worst part. Ygritte knows that she cannot protect all those around her. She knows that they cannot live forever on what remains of the night's meal. Even as they creep towards the sunrise they know is coming, she feels hunger begin to tug at her. The young and old will be feeling this worse than she, and may not have the restraint to stay their stomachs. None among them drifts to sleep. The elderly comfort the children. After so much time, even they are aware of the horror that waits outside the door. You cannot explain to them that their fathers, their brothers, will not be coming back. Right now they sail towards Valhalla, most likely. Or slowly run into the snow, their resolve holding them firm on Midgard's firmament. The quiet stretches out for too long. This hall no longer feels like a place of song and revelry. Instead, it is the maw of a slumbering giant. No one dares move, lest it swallow them up. Then crackling breaks the silence. It sounds like the scratching of 1,000 cats. The thatch atop the building betrays their doom, as thin strands of light begin to flicker through it. Smoke descends between the fine strands of grass, and soon, Ygritte knows, the hall will be ablaze. There is little in the hall to weaponize, but they set about themselves and seize up anything that can deliver death. A tankard with a heavy bottom. No ale will fill its top but its base. Perhaps it can empty a mouth of teeth. Perhaps with enough drive, even empty the light from the eyes. The woodsman's hatchet will no longer split logs for warmth, but cleave skulls instead. A thirst it learned it had but hours ago, now desperate to be slaked. Shields and banners that hang from the walls are pulled down, in the hope they can protect the weaker kin who huddle now surrounded by them. No words are exchanged as the objects are handed out. Women who know their strength come first. Fishwives who have hauled nets from boats and know they have the might to take a man's heir should it come to it. Soon even needleworkers and frail grandmothers seize armament. But more than that, they seize vain hope. They turn their eyes away from the growing blaze above them, and they face their door. Their doom. What now, Ingrid? How shall we fight? How can we win? The questions flood Ingrid, and she knows there is no true answer. All she knows is she will not have her body taken by these monsters. She will not give her life without fight to these steel-clad pigs. The door is cleared at speed. No care given now. It is with guilt that she looks upon the upturned face of Hela, carved so delicately. She knows she will have to answer to her for this soon. She will have to prove her worth, or be disallowed from Valhalla. The door is clear of all but the table. No sound comes from beyond. No slamming of shields against wood, no roaring of orders in their foreign tongue. With effort grown great by the sleepless night, the table is moved and the doors flung open. No one waits for them in the cold morning mist. Left to burn, not worth the steel. None but their fallen lovers, partners, champions, fathers. Steam still rising from their wounds. The last vapors of noble Nordic heroism, drifting now to join the foam of sea and rolling storm clouds. Saxons lay dead too, but not enough of them. Truly, there could never be enough of them felled. The mead hall burns, but Ygritte Allansdottir does not search for her father. She knows where he is now. She does not search for Ori Ranulfsson. The warmth of his arms and the scent of fresh soap in his beard will no longer be her moonlight comforts. He too is with her father, feasting and hunting and bellowing at Odin's great feast. There is nothing left to do for these brave warriors, save build them mounds that snowdrops may grow upon. Nothing but memories of the murder that befell them as they drank in peace. The savagery of men who called themselves civilized and her gentle, beautiful kin barbarians. Ingrid does not feel herself release the axe at last. But finally, she weeps.
I was in from Saxon blood. That was
Of
where it
course
really
you were.
got going. Oh, that was really fun. It was really like a rich Viking tapestry. Like the tone of a lot of the Viking stories that we get on either in fiction or on like TV or whatever like that. Like it had all of that like tone and feel to it, with the temperature and the items that are around them. That like it had a very like tactile feel to the description, which I really liked.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well. That it really set the scene. You kind of feel like you're there in a building under siege. You did a really great job with that.
When
Do you have
you say, it reminded you of a lot of those TV shows and stuff, I think writing this sort of thing, especially in short form fiction, relies really heavily on people having, if you say Rohan, they can make a picture of Rohan in their head.
Mm.
So if you say, it's a Viking mead hall, your brain can hopefully do a lot of the work for the writer. So
Yeah,
I think
save
it's a
some
trick.
words. The tension as well was really well sort of pushed through. I think it was undoubtable what emotions the characters were being assailed by, and I really liked the twist of them just sort of being left. Yeah, is it based on any particular sacking from the Saxons doing something to the Vikings?
No, and that's probably to my shame. But it's I really like this idea. People talk about a lot now that the Vikings are very clean and well kept, and that's why other cultures painted this image of them as these wild barbarians. But they were very beautiful, and they had great craftsmanship. And
Yeah.
to a culture of artists and poets with brushed hair, men in metal would be a horrible way to end an evening. And I wanted to see a bit of that perspective.
Yeah, I think that was why I sort of asked about if there was like a particular like historical anchor for it, because that feels to me like definitely like late Danelaw,
Yeah.
because they've clearly had time to get comfy, haven't they?
Yeah.
This isn't the early Viking explorers, because they were the guys in Mel at that point. Like they were the ones jumping in and stuff. I loved that it was just all women as well inside the and all of what you were discussing was about like you using the female gods and this kind of thing.
Yeah.
It worked for your turn, because the Saxons were, of course, I think, just a very they were the words escape me. Sorry, like a very patriarchal
Yeah.
because of their religion and this kind of thing. Whereas we know that there was theoretically quite a lot of not probably wasn't equality, but like it was probably a lot closer to it with the Vikings.
Yeah, I liked the idea that these, the fisherwomen, they're not the same as, the idea of fisherwomen in England sewing the nets back together. These were women who could pull a haul.
Yeah.
This Ygritte, I mean, I only made one reference to it, but I had this idea that she worked with grain and she was, always carrying things. She was a big woman, and that's why, she could defend herself. But it didn't make her unstoppable. She was still afraid, and yeah, it was just an interesting thing to explore as neither a big person at 5'7" or a woman.
I was once told I've got no idea whether it was apocryphal or not, but the anecdote was that if you were a Viking man or whatever, and you went off raiding, and you were gone for 12, 13 months, and you came back and your wife had a child in that time, with another man, that was your child, because you'd made the decision to not be there, this kind of thing. And so like I kind of got like this kind of like sense of independence from these women in this hall, which was really cool. There's a real rich tapestry, very, very fun. And a hall burning is always terrifying, like, because with the prompt Fortified, if you've got a thatch roof, people can just wait outside and burn you out. So yeah, very good.
You can bar the door all you like.
From like a technical perspective, though, I really like the way that you turn bits of description. It was particularly evident in this story, and AC, you've probably got the technical term for it, but I'm thinking of it as like a reversal of description. So there was stuff like the hull of her cheeks sinking the ship of her courage.
Yeah.
The way that the tavern won't fill anymore, but it might empty a man's teeth, empty a man's mouth of teeth.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's always pairings for your description, which has a really nice flow to it. It's almost like a lyrical quality. So if you're dealing with something that's Viking-y, then it might be a bit like like the Poetic Edda or something. They had an oral storytelling tradition, which I think that kind of like coupleting of description really helps with.
Maybe I'm just a hack, Ben.
Can you be a hack for the Poetic Edda? Is that?
Yes, it's called songwriting.
Oh yes, thoroughly enjoyed it.
It was very, very nicely done. And I do love that the focus is kind of on everyday people, not necessarily, the warriors who are going out and conquering or who are used to doing the fighting. But like you say, it's, people who fish and farm and, who are kind of often left out of heroic stories because they're not the warriors. So it's sort of nice to see that focus shifted.
Yeah, it's the everyday hero having to act as the actual hero, which is a rarely seen but fun concept.
And actually, there's sort of more true heroism, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a way.
If you're bred to fight, then you're expected to. But if you have the courage to fight without the training, good on you.
I actually don't know what do female warriors in the Viking like mythology go to Valhalla? Do they become like Einherjar in the meat hall? Because I don't know. I
don't really know. I know the idea of the shield maiden is vaguely apocryphal, isn't it? They're not.
I think they have found some corpses of female warriors in like mass graves of battles and stuff. So I think
I think almost certainly if your culture's going to have the legend of the Valkyrie, you're not going to stop a big lady who is fearsome from picking up a Dane axe. But yeah, I think the idea of always having your dedicated shield lady next to your Thane is a bit
quite possible.
Bit odd. Right,
well,
should we let a professional have a go?
I think so. I
feel like you've given me a hard act to follow, so.
Well, it is all an act.
Surrounded by people lying to me.
It's my Edda showing.
Objectively, the dress is beautiful. Fine ribs in the bodice will support and reshape her. Thousands of seed pearls shimmer from waist to hem, and the belled skirt layered with silk, chiffon, and lace appears weightless. Subjectively, the dress is a horror, a prison, a trap. She wants nothing to do with it. But she is a princess. She is the eldest. The king has no male heir. She must be wed. In the quietest part of night, the eldest princess and her sisters talk of the future. Their beds form a circle around the room's perimeter, and the dress looms in the corner, a phantom, an omen, watching over the sisters as they speak. I never want to be wed, says the youngest middle sister. I want to be a knight and go on adventures. I want my own bright polished armor and magical sword. I want ballads sung about me, slaying dragons and bringing home their treasure so no one in our realm will ever go hungry again. Humph, says the oldest middle sister. Well, I want to be a dragon, so you'd better just find something else to slay. Oh, the youngest middle sister looks abashed. Well, perhaps I could slay trolls instead? They have rather a lot of treasure, don't they? Unless... She lets her words trail, lest any of her other sisters proclaim a sudden desire to become trolls. The middle sister waves a dismissive hand. That's all well and good, but I intend to be a witch. I'll cast powerful spells to help those who deserve it, and curse those who don't. I'll have dozens of animal familiars, and everyone will be in awe of me. People will wonder what I'm up to, but I'll only give them a mysterious smile as I pass by, so they'll be a little afraid of me as well. I'd like to be a baker, says the youngest. I'll make the most wonderful cakes, 15 layers high, one in every flavor, and people will weep for joy when they taste them. My bread will remind people of home. My scones will instantly turn enemies into friends, and my pies will make it so that people always remember to say sorry to those they've wronged. The second to youngest sister blushes and fidgets with the hem of her nightgown. A husband might not be so bad, she says, looking down. Or perhaps a wife? I haven't decided yet. Maybe one of each, just to be sure? Or perhaps I want to be somebody else's husband. Is that allowed? Oh, it's so hard to decide. The twisting of her nightgown grows more agitated until the second to eldest sister pats the second to youngest on the knee and says, You have plenty of time to decide, and you can change your mind as many times as you like, as long as you do your best not to hurt anyone. The second to youngest sister beams, relieved, while the second to eldest sister turns to the eldest, the one whose dress looms in the corner, upon whom the weight of the kingdom rests. What about you? The second to eldest asks. The two are nearly twins, born only 10 months apart. They've always had a special bond. You haven't said yet either, the eldest answers, blinking back tears, voice hoarse as she tries to maintain control. Oh, I expect I'll travel, the second to eldest replies airily, then leans forward. But you must tell us what you want. Yes, do. A look passes between the sisters, quick and bright, which makes the eldest's heart fill with hope and then immediately tumble with fear. She's not allowed to want anything. Don't her sisters understand? She has no hopes for her future, no plans, only responsibilities. What she wants doesn't enter into it at all. Tell us, says the middle sister, and there's such a softness to her voice, such a gentleness that the eldest sister breaks. Tears spill, and she buries her face in her hands. I want to be a castle, she says. Even now, among her sisters, it seems too strange a thing to admit aloud. Her sisters all want to be warm, living things, but her desire to be a building feels beyond the pale. Yet it has been her dearest wish for as long as she can recall, since the first moment she looked up to the walls of their own castle. She wants to be graceful towers, precise crenellations, pennants snapping in the wind, ramparts and portcullis and gray stone piled upon stone, all speaking to defense, strength, keeping everything and everyone she loves safe inside. She wants to be vast and quiet. She wants to grow room upon room, one for each of her sisters. For her oldest middle sister, she will hollow out an underground cavern fit for a dragon and her horde. For her youngest middle sister, she will sprout an armory, bristling with magical weapons. Her middle sister shall have the highest tower, crammed with books and platforms and perches and niches for all of her familiars. The youngest shall have the finest kitchen in the land, while the second youngest will have a suite of rooms to fill with as many husbands and wives as she chooses, or none at all. And her almost twin, the next oldest, shall have a key and the light left on, so she will always know she has a place to rest whenever she returns from her travels. But none of this is possible, for she is a princess and the eldest, and marriage is her fate. We understand, the youngest says, taking the eldest's hand. And we'll help you, says the next to youngest. How? Her sister's kindness breaks the eldest's heart, but all the more so because it feels naive, too impossible, and therefore cruel. One doesn't simply become a witch overnight, her middle sister says, quirking her lips into a mysterious and knowing smile. It requires years of practice. As does being a dragon, says the oldest middle sister. Or a questing knight, says the youngest middle. We've all been preparing, gathering, learning, brewing, and we know just what to do. The eldest looks from face to face in wonder, in confusion. The youngest sister produces a round-bottomed flask, stopped with a cork and wax, filled with liquid that looks a little bit like granite-made water, shimmering and swirling in the light. I mixed this up in the kitchen, says the youngest. According to my instructions, says the middle sister. With ingredients we journeyed far and wide to gather, say the youngest, middle, and the second oldest sisters together. Including dragon scale, says the oldest middle sister proudly. And a bit of advice from some friends I know, says the second youngest sister, blushing. What is it? The eldest sister asks. It's a fortification potion, her almost twin responds. Quite literally, the middle sister once more favors them with a wry and mysterious smile. Whenever you're ready, says the second eldest. The tears overflowing the eldest's eyes are tears of gratitude now as her sisters wind their arms around her, a castle of skin and bone, keeping her safe, keeping her protected. I'm ready now, she says. The eldest sister snatches the wedding dress from its hook on the wall, and all together the sisters sneak outside to sprint across the lawn. Once they are far enough away, the eldest sister kisses each of her sisters in turn. Thank you, and thank you, and thank you, she says to each of them. Whatever you choose in your lives, I know you'll all be brilliant, and no matter what happens, you will always have a home. Clutching the wedding dress close, she swallows the potion down. Her bones harden inside her skin, growing new vaulted ribs to support and reshape her. Crenellations sharpen against the night sky, fluttering with pennants seeded with pearls, made of lace and chiffon and silk. She sprouts towers, almost too many to count, and the chambers of her heart become chambers for every one of her sisters, each according to their dreams. The eldest sister is happy. She is fortified, safe, steady, strong, and vast enough to contain everyone she loves, whatever their future may bring.
That's lovely and very heartwarming.
Lovely is exactly the word I was about to say.
Yeah, it's just sort of, it was like it was well, forgive the term, concrete turn of fantasy, like flight of fantasy, because this, yeah, it was so, it was obviously you're set up in this like really rigid scenario where the elder sister has to marry for the good of the kingdom, etc. But then the dramatic tension is built up around finding out what she wants, which is a really nice thing to build up dramatic tension about. You know, rather than necessarily, you know, I know a few of the stories that I've done for this podcast, like it's finding out like whether someone's going to die or not. I guess is the dramatic tension. But that was so I felt like that was quite special. This idea of the actual drive of the story being about knowing what people, in particular the daughters of this royal family, want. It felt very strong, I would say.
Tell you, I absolutely loved all of the sisters.
Yeah,
As a man with multiple younger sisters, they felt so unbelievably real to me in the way they were talking to each other.
the bit with the find something else to slay was great. That was
The pause afterwards, and just in case anyone was about to say, "Well, I want to be a troll," just that moment of I want to be cool, but I don't want to upset my sisters. I'm just gonna wait. It was so real. If anything, it made that the potential fantasy of that world realer too. It really worked as a way of making me feel like I was there. I did also think at one point the twist was going to be they're talking about all this and then it's like Harlem in the 70s or something. But
Well, that would have been kind of fun to play with too.
maybe that's just my weird brain.
I really wanted to sort of go with, like that traditional fantasy
Yeah.
setting and kind of play with all those traditional fantasy characters like dragons and witches and, kind of give it that fairy tale feel with, sort of the main quest is kind of to fulfill your heart's desire, but in maybe a little bit of an unusual or non-traditional way.
Lovely to have that,
yeah.
Fairy tale fantasy world. But her dream isn't to marry the charming prince that she's being forced to wed, that she has her own dreams. That's, just a really lovely take on it, I think.
Sometimes a girl just wants to grow up to be a castle.
To be a castle, yeah. The idea of obviously the concept of a character wanting to be a building is pretty fucking wild. But I felt that you handled it very well. It felt right inside the way that you'd set the story's limits, and it like the tone of the story. It just worked. Yeah, like right from the off, like with stuff like this idea of the wedding dress being a phantom, it being a symbolic death in white. Oh yeah, yeah, it had a very rich story. Again, I think both of the stories we've had so far have been really sort of like really dripping with the tone they were aiming towards and achieved, which is really cool.
Well, you know what they say, Ben. No man is an island, but some women are castles. That's the old saying,
Exactly.
isn't it?
Pretty sure I've heard people say that.
There's definitely some kind of joke about siege equipment there.
Oh, Lady Sybil would be proud.
She would. Good old Sybil Ramkin.
It's Vines now.
You sounded so protective.
I love her dearly.
Misnamed her, sorry.
Yeah, no. You dreadful bastard. Well, as punishment, sound and righteous punishment for your crimes against the Discworld. Why did I say Discworld like that?
The Discworld.
The Discworld. The Discworld. I'm going to make you read a story now then, Ben. That's where I was leading with that. That was the worst segue, and we're leaving it all in. Congratulations, listener. You're coming on this journey with us.
It was like rather than opening the door to the next room, you decided to use a jackhammer to make a door next to that door.
I don't like this bookcase.
Yeah. Let's move that tiny bookcase out of the way for a moment.
Wham!
Right, okay. I'll give it a go.
Sorry, I've got the giggles now. Oh, you're going to do a sad story now, aren't you? And it's going to be weird.
I don't think so. I think it's supposed to be fun, but I never can tell with me, because sometimes I think that something is going to be really, really like sad, and then it turns out funny, and then the reverse happens quite a lot as well. So I don't know. Maybe I'm just shit at tone.
Okay, tell your story before I have a full meltdown. It's going to be fun. I am a professional. Beep, beep, bingle, beep.
We're just barging in a moment to tell you about something cool.
200,000 book titles are published every year in the UK. Just 17% of these are lucky enough to get a decent marketing budget and make it to the bestsellers list. Among the other 83% are many amazing books and authors that remain undiscovered. Shockingly, it's estimated that 70 million of these books are destroyed each year in the UK alone.
A Box of Stories wants to change that By scanning thousands of titles and using real reader recommendations, their algorithm saves these brilliant books from being lost forever by curating a box of 4 surprise books. You could even pick the genre of the box, like historical fiction or crime.
Discovering new work has never been easier or more exciting, and a box of stories has saved more than 100,000 books already. To receive £4 off of your first box, use the code TINY when you check out at www.aboxofstories.com. That's TINY, all in lowercase, at www.aboxofstories.com.
Now let's get back to our stories.
Beep, Bengal, beep, beep.
Fortified. The bartender appeared to have someone else's skin stretched over his face. It was pinned in place by rusting rivets, and when he frowned, there was a delay of expression as the muscles shifted under the layers. John Diggle, not wanting to be rude, declined to overtly notice it. In doing so, he missed the social cue that would have told him he'd made a mistake coming inside. The bar's interior was a mix of anachronistic oddities. Grecian pillars held up a barrel-vaulted ceiling, and dark tavern timber striped the flaking pale plaster walls. Diggle shook his coat by the door as it closed behind him. The Boston rain, always ready to test the waterproofing claims of optimistic manufacturers, showered off it onto the welcome mat, which held the words "fuck off" in multiple languages. Diggle folded his coat over his arm and felt the residual moisture soak into the sleeve of his button-up. The 7 or so paces to the bar were akin to walking through a tight canyon. The pressure of the stares he was receiving from the other clientele squished him in and kept him on a straight course to an empty bar stool. Once there, he hung his coat from the peg below the bar's brass rail and hoisted his arse up onto the stool. "How did you get in?" Diggle looked up, and the bartender's skin situation suddenly became something he could not ignore. The man was leaning over the bar towards him, nearly nose to nose, and the double layers were tight around his lips as he spoke. The sign said you were open." Diggle tried to keep his voice even, as he felt the aggression soak into him from the bartender's words. "We are always open. How did you get in?" "The door?" That seemed to give the man food for thought. As he chewed it over, Diggle was struck with the desire to never watch the man eat. At last, the bartender continued the conversation. "Drink?" he asked. A shot of tequila and a bottle of lager with a lime in the top, please." "Not a bad order," said the bartender, and made an inscrutable facial expression. "Thank you." Diggle, feeling like he had passed some sort of test, twisted on his stool and glanced about himself. An assortment of day drinkers were at their business in the booths of the bar. In one, a large, handsome old man with a thuggish jaw was grinning to himself. A row of empty pint glasses stood on the table in front of him. Residue from the frothy beer they'd held still clung to the interior of the glass. Diggle realised the man was looking at him, and when their gazes met, he felt like he'd just exchanged a smile with the devil. The man gave Diggle a thumbs up before gulping down his next drink and rapping his knuckles on the table for more. As Diggle looked away, he thought that perhaps he had seen the row of pint glasses begin to fill up again from the bottom. Diggle's eyes were drawn to the next booth along, where the denizen sat hunched like a bat. This man was wearing a sun visor and dressed as though he were about to play tennis, badly. His white socks were knee-high, and on the booth table in front of him sat an ugly old iron typewriter. One pale hand shot out and gripped the dirty highball glass filled with hard drink in front of him. The man chugged at it, spilling some on the typewriter, before being struck by inspiration. Diggle watched with disbelieving horror as the man's other hand came up. In it, he held a long-nosed revolver, which he proceeded to use to press the keys on the typewriter. The concentration of the effort caused the man's face to screw up around the empty cigarette holder he clenched between his teeth. The next booth also contained a man writing. This man, however, was not dressed for sport, but instead leaned over his pen whilst wearing a chunky roll-neck jumper. His thick fingers occasionally strayed from his work to the fruity daiquiri by his elbow. Diggle's attention snapped back to his own slice of the bar as his drink order was slapped down in front of him. "Oh, thank you," said Diggle, but the bartender had already moved away. He decided at that point to follow the unwritten rule of day drinking. mind your own business. Diggle slung the shot back and sucked a sip of the beer through the lime. The warmth of it spread through him. He felt like a passive observer witnessing his ability to give a shit melt and shear off him like the last of the polar glaciers crashing into the dark sea. As an Englishman abroad on business and finding his work done, the idea of tossing away the rest of the day had appealed to the nihilistic side of him. His chosen method had seemed sound: stroll into a Bostonian bar and screw a buzz on until the sun died. The hostelry near his hotel seemed exactly the sort of place to do it. Dark smudges of filth built up from decades of standing by a freeway had stained the brickwork of the squat establishment. The place seemed to have clung on despite the gentrification that progressed around it like a cancer. The small window was barred in and out with grids of metal, fortifying the place against rogue thrown bottles of ejected punters. Sat inside that mesh of metal and secured to the window had been a neon open sign that pulsed red like the blood of an electric god was being thumped through it. Diggle wasn't above trying somewhere else, however, and the warmth of that first drink had put some starch back into his collar. One drink in an unfriendly bar was something he could stomach, but more than that might court disaster. How much for the drink? Said Diggle when he caught the bartender's attention. The ugly man's inscrutable expression pulled at his double-weave face. Diggle looked away in order to pull his wallet out. I wouldn't advise leaving until you've had a few more. What's beyond requires a bit more fortification of the spirit. What? Same again? I guess so. The next few rounds came promptly, and Diggle began to misplace his inhibitions. The other drinkers were getting rowdier as well, and out of the corner of his eye he surreptitiously watched them. A fat man wearing a toga over which his long beard flowed argued eloquently with the handsome woman he shared a booth with. Her cocktail dress was a starker white than his toga, and both were as revealing as each other. Diggle noticed her eyes were so blue as to be nearing violet, and her lashes fluttered whenever she seized a weakness in the man's discourse. The fat man's lips and teeth were stained, as if he'd been using them to mash blueberries. The large beer-drinking man with the jawline had stripped off his shirt in order to do push-ups on the table next to his row of refilling pints. Diggle jumped as the man in the sun visor fired his revolver into the ceiling before shouting, "Finished!" Pulling the paper from the typewriter and bundling it with the other sheets on his table, he palmed them behind him to the next booth over. Diggle saw the occupant of that table hurriedly finish what he'd been scribbling in a notebook before exchanging it for the proffered pages. The two men sat back to back as they were, with the divide of the booth wall between them, picked up their drinks simultaneously, and began to read each other's work. Time to go. Things get interesting when they start giving each other feedback. The two-faced bartender rasped. Diggle looked at him, feeling ready to ask, "What is this place?" The man's double face moved, and Diggle could now see that sometimes the two skins would give him different looks. The last bar. And it should be for everyone in here, but it isn't for you. As you can see, I've got my hands full with my regulars. How much do I owe you? More than you can afford to give. Mind how you go. This place is protected, but beyond it, the forces that want to take these await. Do not come back. Right, of course. Diggle, feeling entirely as though he had imbibed far too much, decided to store all of this in the deal with it later section of his mind. He slid off the stool unsteadily and shrugged his coat on before heading for the door. He hurriedly pulled it open and stepped out without looking up. Too late, he realized his mistake and found himself hurtling through an inky void in which flashes of light snaked towards him. Feeling weightless and unable to control his direction, Diggle watched with horror as the cracks of the universe opened up around him. Finding it too much to bear, Diggle screwed his eyes shut. He felt his foot stamp on the pavement heavily and tentatively opened his eyes. The rain still poured, and the Boston skyline loomed through the greyness of it. Diggle heard the door close behind him and turned to look at the bar. It appeared as it had when he had entered it that afternoon. As he watched, the sign in the small guarded window flickered once, before shunting emphatically from open to closed.
I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Very nice. Very atmospheric.
Mm.
Could definitely picture, very clearly everything that was going on, and the character descriptions were wonderful.
Yeah, well, I think that was very kind of you. I'm not sure I can take all the credit for them. They were all people from reality/history.
I was going to
I was
say
wondering about that.
some of them felt like combinations of people and ideas of a person rather than the actual person. If you get what I'm trying to say with that.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like the guy with the typewriter was a mix. Definitely felt like a mix of Hunter S. Thompson and God, who's the other writer who you really like? Who sadly drank himself away, didn't he?
That guy was actually just the intention was just Hunter S. Thompson there.
Okay.
Yeah. And of course he's sat next to Hemingway.
Yeah.
Did you clock any of the other characters at all?
So,
There were maybe some Greek philosophers there.
There was Socrates was arguing with Elizabeth Taylor.
Socrates.
And no story about day drinking. It can be complete without including Oliver Reed, who was the beer drinking large man.
Of course.
But yeah, it sort of came from this idea that when you day drink, things get a trifle weird, and to do it in a theoretically even stranger place would be very odd indeed. The real character that's quite difficult to identify, I think, because I've only sort of hinted at it, is the bartender.
Two faces.
My intention was to have him as like a realization of the Roman god Janus, the two-faced god.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's the god of beginnings and endings and doorways and portals, basically. So this idea that he's running a bar for history's drinkers.
No, if I'm going to drink with the god, I hit up Dionysus. He is a day drinking champion, my friend.
Day drinking and night drinking and all the times in between.
Yep. Pretty constant.
I mean, apart from having some jokes in it that really did land, and I know that you worry about that, so you had me laughing. Well done. I know you've been waiting for it, and you got it, man. You absolutely nailed it. It had that kind of grim. I guess the closest thing is Adamsy humor, like a touch of the Douglas Adams, but not his sort of jokes. I mean, comedy's a really odd thing to talk about and try and frame in that way. But it sounded like you, but you definitely found your zone for writing comedy. So if you want to do more of it, stick with what you did, because you definitely found your comedic voice.
Oh, cool. That's useful feedback. I enjoyed the. It didn't feel like I was trying to be funny, but it just sort of did. It felt funny.
Amusing.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm particularly enamored with and want the doormat that says "fuck off" in a bunch of languages. I would actually really like one of those.
Yes, it was a good bit of fun.
I like how, from the same prompt, we all came up with such different things too.
Yeah, I was.
So it's a fun thing about writing to a prompt.
Yeah, I was a little bit nervous actually when Nico started telling his story that the mead hall was going to be like paired with Valhalla.
Yeah.
And this idea of Valhalla being, like a drinking hall in the afterlife, and that's quite close to this, I think.
Oh yeah.
But obviously he didn't go in that direction, which is cool. So yeah, we managed to all stay pretty distinct from each other there.
I can now announce on the podcast. I had said to you, Ben, that when I first read Fortified, I kept thinking of that thing they print on cereal boxes where it says "Fortified with B vitamins," and I started writing a story from the perspective of a bowl of cereal as an army being assaulted by a milk force. And it was all being centered around the joke Special K forces. And
oh God.
I got like 400 words in and I was like, I have to stop. This is horrible. This is too much pun. Too much pun.
I'm gonna need you to finish that story and then publish it on the Patreon.
Fine. I will do that. I will write the milk bowl cereal war story. But no,
Yes.
I genuinely really enjoyed where you fell with that, man. It was my kind of
Yeah.
weird, and I really dug it.
I think the I think possibly the tone, the element of the like the point of the story was I possibly sort of went astray from it and kind of lost it a little bit. Like the idea was that it was supposed to be something cautionary for this young man abroad. Like don't really don't do stuff like day drinking.
Well,
It's
I
you know
got the sense, and it might just be that I always go to a dark place, but that he was possibly suicidal and was, not in a good place himself,
mm,
and saw this last glimpse into people who died not ready to go into the afterlife. That's what it felt like when you were reading it.
yeah.
So your cautionary tale element definitely came through. I'd
Okay,
say.
good. All right, I'm glad that it did them.
Yeah, I was just wondering if he was going to, discover along the way that he was dead, and I kind of liked that it wasn't one of those. And he was dead all along. He took it in a different direction.
Yeah, I think I kind of quite instinctively stayed away from that. I think because as I say, I wanted it to be a cautionary thing. There's no use cautioning someone that's already dead, I guess.
All right.
But yeah, in particular, yeah, it's the bar itself is at least the exterior is based on a bar that I went to in Boston. So it's always
Were
nice
you
to
dead at the
stop in.
time?
I felt it after the hours that I spent, recovering from jet lag and then drinking in that bar.
So the correct answer is only on the inside.
Yeah, pretty much. Anyway, let's have some questions. I'm excited to learn more about ACYs.
Let's do exactly that. We've spent some time reading our stories, but AC, what are you reading at the moment?
I am reading Usman T. Malik's collection Midnight Doorways, which conveniently is a short story collection, and it's really quite lovely. It's there's some that I had read previously and some that I'm discovering for the first time, and his stuff is always just so amazing and so beautifully written, and he does a lot of sort of nested stories within stories, and it's just kind of nice to see so many of them in one place and kind of see those themes recurring throughout his work. I highly recommend the collection. It's all nicely illustrated inside too. So
Is this
sounds gorgeous, illustrators and everything.
Is it a physical thing or is this a digitally book?
I think there are ebook versions as well. I got the physical one. I'm very much a sucker for still physical books and things that I can hold and physically turn the pages.
Yeah, of course. So what was it called one more time? Sorry.
It's Midnight Doorways, and it was, I think, just released either last month or maybe earlier this month even.
It's a good time.
And the author is Usman T. Malik.
Is it? Does it fit to a theme, or is it just the collected works and they're all just lovely and nice?
I'd say that, it is, I guess, collected works, but it does sort of have a theme in that a lot of his work is sort of, based in mythology and fairy tale.
Okay.
And the majority of them are set in Pakistan as well. So I guess those are kind of recurring themes in his work in general, and therefore sort of recurring themes in this collection.
While we're on collections of short stories that don't have a theme at all, we do have our first season anthology is out now. Anyone listening, you can get all of the stories from season 1 in digital book form. It's the same as the stories on the podcast, except now you can see how the names are spelt. Lovely.
Oh, I love a shameless self plug. I really do. It
was very smoothly done too.
It was gorgeous.
Everything I do is smooth. I'm hairless, like a newborn.
It just slides down the stairs.
My house is just ramps and baby oil.
It's actually quite inconvenient.
Whatever floats your boat.
It's very inconvenient for guests. I can say that.
I have not been to the first floor in so long. I'm so slippery. Help me. My bed is up there. I haven't slept in months.
Right. Oh, the noise of that train derailing this. What what is the best book you've ever read, AC?
Oh, that is a really tough question.
It's only going to get worse.
Oh no. Well, I'm never good at picking a favorite in any of these types of things. So I'll just pick a recent read. I'll just cheat and change the
Yeah,
question.
whatever's the first thing that jumps into your mind, really.
Yeah. So a recent read that I really loved was Primi Mohammed's A Broken Darkness. It's the sequel to Beneath the Rising. Beneath the Rising, I guess, came out early in 2020, and this one came out in March of 2021. And it's sort of the first one, I guess, is a little bit more rooted in like sort of the everyday with cosmic horror creeping in, and then the sequel kind of goes full cosmic horror, portals to other worlds, tentacles and tendrils and creatures that turn themselves inside out. Um, it's really, really wonderful and very, complicated characters, I guess, would be a good way to put it. Not necessarily likable characters who can be sort of, nasty, but you still root for them.
Is that a draw for you? This idea of having complex characters that can be a bit troublesome to like sometimes.
Definitely. I especially appreciate it when female characters are kind of allowed to be prickly and unlikable, because I think there is very much sort of a leaning towards the be nice, be likable, especially for female protagonists of stories. But you can have sort of the gruff, unlikable, morally gray male characters all the time, like the classic Western characters of the sort of the loner cowboy who's kind of a jackass to everyone around him, but is still the hero of the story. And it's kind of nice to see that opening up to female characters as well a bit more now.
For some reason, I think it's because you brought up westerns, but I was really struck by the teenage girl character from True Grit, the remake. This idea of having a fairly prickly female antagonist that some people like, some people do not like, and you can sort of see why. It does just make a story feel richer and more sort of detailed and realer. So do you find that helps with this kind of, you were saying that this intrusion of cosmic horror? Would it have fallen flat possibly without the textured characterization?
I think so. I mean, I think, kind of dealing with cosmic horror sort of requires a certain level of almost unlikableness in characters, or at least, that's kind of the history of some sort of cosmic horror where you kind of have, a less than perfect character dealing with really horrible situations. And I think, it works very well in the case of these two novels to sort of have somebody who's like, well, I'll do whatever it takes, I'll do what needs to be done in the face of this terrible horror, and I'm not going to worry about hurting people's feelings or stepping on people's toes because there are larger things at stake here.
Yeah, it sounds very compelling.
I'm getting the picture that we know you like complicated characters. Cosmic horror sounds like it's a point of interest. We know you have a thing for mythology and fairy tales because it's come up a couple of times already. But what is your biggest literary turn-off? What is something that, if it shows up in a book or a writing style, that you just can't hack?
That's another really good question. And now I'm trying to think what that would be. I mean, I am one of those people who will give, pretty much anything I'm reading, pretty long time. I don't abandon books.
Yeah.
I've got this like weird, like I have to finish it if I started reading it. But I guess maybe, I don't know, just sort of unmotivated characters, where, kind of things are just sort of happening and you don't really get a sense of, why this character is doing this, what, the reasoning behind any of it, where you just sort of have like a flat, one-dimensional character who's just kind of being moved through the plot of the story, where, none of their kind of personality or their choices that don't affect anything. It's just like, well, this person has to go there now because the plot demands it. Now they go to point B and now they go to point C, and it doesn't really feel like there's any, personality or meaning behind any of it. That's always kind of disappointing to encounter in a narrative.
We're looking at you, Dan Brown.
That, yeah. Oh, and the character, he sort of hits all of the sins there of like the character spending a long time looking at themselves in the mirror as if they've never seen themselves before and describing themselves to the reader, and yeah.
This is the third time that Dan Brown's taken a kicking on this podcast. So
I'm sure he can console himself with his piles of money.
it's quite easy. He could just stuff them in his ears and not listen to us.
Exactly.
What are you talking about? He's a top tier Patreon. Thanks, Dan. You're keeping us going.
He's just a set of masochists. He just loves hearing people shit on his work.
The safe word is Da Vinci Code.
The safe word is Da Vinci Code.
It takes ages to get it out. By that time, it's too late.
So obviously that's what doesn't work for you. Does that come from? Was it possible for you to identify that because of your review work?
I think that plays into it. I mean, I do, a lot of reading, and I did actually co-edit an online publication for a while. So that does kind of give you, I guess, a little bit of an eye for, what works in terms of a narrative, or, stories that actually deliver on their promise, and, where you can tell that authors have really actually sort of thought deeply about their characters and why that character in particular is in this story versus any other character, who are actually having their characters impact the story and vice versa. So yeah, I think, lots of reading kind of in various capacities as a pure reader, as a reviewer, and as an editor sort of maybe makes you more aware of those things.
And so to sort of invert that, this idea of characters that it doesn't matter who they are because the story's going to happen around them anyway. What about the other direction of that, where there are novels or stories where they're just character driven and there isn't an overarching serious thought to plot or story? I'm thinking it's a pretty bad example because obviously Game of Thrones does have a good overarching plot and stuff, but this idea of it being the characters being almost the entire sole driving force behind the story, does that leave you cold as well, or not as much?
I think if I'm in the right mood for it, it can be very enjoyable. If I'm sort of going in with the mindset of, this is really sort of more of a slice of life piece where I'm not necessarily expecting, big dramatic plot or anything like that, then it can be very satisfying depending on, I guess, how it's handled and the mood I'm in when I'm reading. And sometimes you just want something with, lots of action or that combines the plot and character. And sometimes you're willing to just sit with something that is, just very quiet and introspective and really is just rooted in the characters and sort of their thoughts on life.
So off the back of that, then the next question is actually quite interesting because it's what is your favorite literary character? And I'm interested to see where you situate your favorite literary character in that spectrum we've gone through there.
Oh no. Another one of those very tough questions. So you may be getting the idea that I'm very bad at picking favorites. Favorite literary character. So is this sort of as in the genre of literature?
It's actually just
or
whatever actual character leaps off the page and into your mind when the question is posed, really.
All right, I'm going to need to give this a little bit of thought, and I'm sort of scanning my bookshelves as I think that Well, see, now I'm just looking at my graphic novels and all the Batman books that are staring at me. So now I just kind of want to say Batman.
Say Batman. Batman's fine.
Which is funny because it is a very archetypical character who's, possibly been done to death in a way. But I am sort of a sucker for that story and that, especially sort of within the larger world of the DC universe where, he doesn't have superpowers, but he still goes out there every day. And at the same time, he says sort of a very messed up reaction to, I mean, obviously, tragedy of his parents' death. Many people would just, go into therapy and kind of try to better themselves and move on. But he's decided for some reason that the answer to this, terrible thing happening in his life is to dress up as a giant bat and go punch criminals in the face, which, not necessarily a typical reaction to grief and sorrow, but, it does make for good storytelling. And I think, the fact that the character has been around for, almost 80 years now, I think, and is, there's still new stories to tell about him, and there's still kind of ways that you can reimagine the character because he is such an archetype at this point. It's almost like, the way people reimagine Greek mythology
Yes.
or Norse
Yeah.
mythology, or it's sort of a mythical character at this point that you can use as almost a shorthand to tell other interesting stories because it is so embedded in the culture now.
Yeah. And I suppose when people are going to, thinking of beginning the writing process of making a story for Batman, it's because it's for Batman. It has to be the right story for that character, which does fit in with what you were saying earlier, I think. Like, obviously there can be some bad runs, but for the most part, I would have thought a character with that much like pull can get good writers doing good stories because it's Batman, if that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. And you get things like, one of his core things is, he hates guns and doesn't use guns. So that obviously impacts the story and changes the way he reacts to situations, kind of circling back to, what I was saying before about characters actually having an impact on the story.
Yes, definitely.
And different writers hit different aspects of him. You can get years and years and years where they don't really do the world's greatest detective thing, where he is just quite good at punching people and sneaking about. But then, a new run starts and he does become Sherlock Holmes with a cape. And that's another interesting part of this character's potential narrative, I think that's a really interesting part about those long running characters.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of lean into different aspects of their personality depending on the story you're telling or depending on who's writing it.
I think that's a great answer to that question. Batman. Love it.
Just happened to look at my bookshelf and see that answer sitting there staring at me, which is convenient.
Good old Bruce Batman, attorney at law. So, an even harderer, more harderer than what the other one was question.
Oh no.
What is your process when it comes to writing?
I'm very much a pantser who makes things up as I go along. I don't tend to outline. I will sometimes leave myself notes as I'm writing, but I'm very much a sort of discover in the process of doing.
Like the movie Memento.
Which exactly, yes. I don't tend to tattoo them on though. That's I would run out of room pretty quickly, I think.
So that's a lack of commitment.
Yeah. But yes, I am very much a, discover by doing when it comes to writing. I don't know if that's, it's worked for me so far, and maybe the next time around I'll, the process will be different, but,
so
thus far it has been very much make up as I go along.
So when you go in to start a story, does it generally come from, I have this idea as a jumping off point, or do you have like a concept you want to explore? What's your seed that you plant?
It usually starts with something like an image or a character that I want to explore. I think I very rarely go in with like a, this is going to be sort of about this theme. It's more like this is kind of the starting image, and then hopefully sort of the theme will develop over the course of telling the story, where it can be, either interpreted different ways or does have a bit more to say than, just beyond the surface of what's being written. But I don't think I've ever really gone in deliberately with the like, this story is going to teach people X, or, this is going to be a political allegory or something like that. It is really more comes from a character or an image or sort of just a general, maybe even like a line will jump into my mind and I'm like, ooh, I wonder where that will go.
It sounds like we write in a very similar fashion. I'm going to ask if you do a thing that I do that's possibly quite strange. Do you ever find yourself in the shower or cooking, sort of improvising scenes out loud to yourself, and then thinking, I should probably make a note of this because this is more interesting than anything that comes out when I sit down and actively try to just write off the top of my noggin? Or is that just me?
I wouldn't say I necessarily out loud, but definitely this sort of like, chewing things over as I do something else that doesn't require tons of concentration, as you say, like cooking or, taking the dog for a walk or, driving a route that I know well, so that I can kind of let one part of my mind kind of chew over, a particular plot point or rework lines of dialogue.
Uh-huh.
Sort of a good way to get unstuck when I'm stuck on something is go do something that I don't need to think about too hard.
It's good to know that it's the out loud bit that makes me weird.
Well, we've spoken a bit about for example, stuff like Batman and movies and this kind of thing. If you could adapt any novel to another medium, what novel would it be, and how would you go about it? Why would you do it?
So it's actually a novel series that I would love to see someone adapt for film of some sort, either a mini series or a series of movies. E. Catherine Tobler, her Foley and Mallory series. It's basically archaeologists in Egypt going on adventures that has sort of that very classic pulpy feel, kind of like the Brendan Fraser version of The Mummy.
Yeah.
Not necessarily humorous, but that sort of like very, richly described world, supernatural going on, adventure that does kind of capture that fun classic pulp feel that I feel like kind of tried to come back for a little while and then just sort of either fell out of favor again, or people went towards the more gritty, grim dark. But I think that series would actually be a lot of fun to see on film. I keep hoping that somebody will pick it up and make them into movies.
And have you got any sort of fancy casting for it? Possibly. It sounds like there's 2 leads, is it?
2 leads, and I don't know who I would cast. That I hadn't got that far of thinking, just that I want to see somebody put this on film, and somebody else can figure out the casting part of it.
Very executive producer of you. Just get it done, people.
Just make it happen. I'm saying I can't be bothered with the details.
Yes, ma'am.
It's always actually kind of interesting when stuff like that, like whether people as readers kind of like mentally cast who they would see in that role as they're reading, or whether authors do that. And I feel like I don't really, very rarely when I'm reading do I think, ooh, this person.
I would agree. I don't do it. I especially with sort of like longer fantasy. So, for example, I love the Robin Hobb fantasy series that begins with Assassin's Apprentice. And when I talk to people about it, or see what people post about it online, they all seem to have a really clear image of who they would cast in their mind for it, because it hasn't been made into anything, unlike stuff like Game of Thrones and other things from that era. I always find it a bit strange, because it's sort of, I don't see the characters so sort of visually in my head. I don't think you sort of get a feel for them rather than look for them, I think.
I'm exactly the same.
Yeah. I always find it interesting when people have that like clear, ready to mind answer for something like that, like who your ideal casting would be, either for your own writing or something you've read, because that I don't think of it in that way usually, I guess.
I mean, I guess you could cast from that field, couldn't you? If you know that a character, an actor is typecast or something as a certain kind of actor. Like if you wanted like a mouthy badass, then you might perhaps cast Robert Downey Jr. or someone like that.
I mean, generally the right answer is Gary Oldman or Sam Rockwell, because they can just do anything, can't they?
I would.
It's hard to go wrong with those two.
As intrepid archaeologists, I think.
Oh,
I think we're in. Pitch it. You get an executive producer role.
Here we go.
Yeah, Josh Brolin as the villain.
I'm
Benicio
just
del
casting
Toro.
another Marvel movie here, aren't I?
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
So we've done so much laughing. Let's go the other way. Do you find that you connect really strongly emotionally with books, and can they bring you to tears?
Definitely. I've definitely had that experience of reading something and feeling like it was going to make me cry, or just sort of evoking that very strong emotional reaction. I think one that comes to mind immediately was Maria Devana Headley's Magonia. I remember there were some very, very emotional moments in that one where I was reading it on a train, going, "Oh no, I'm in a public place. I should probably not start bawling."
I have done that,
But yeah.
and it's very difficult to come to terms with yourself after you do it.
You sort of get like funny looks from people.
Yeah.
Like, "Are you okay?" Like, yes, it's just a really good book. Okay.
Yes, exactly.
Do you find the text is enough, or is it affected by your current emotional state, stimulus around you, music, or is it just the words can do it to you?
I think the words can definitely do it. I mean, sometimes it's a combination of factors. Sometimes it is, the emotional state, or it kind of, will make you think of something in your own life that
Yeah.
kind of hits a nerve. But sometimes it's just, the book itself and the situation that can, just hit that emotional chord.
It's not the thickness of the novel; it's the power in the words.
Exactly.
So swinging entirely back the other way from that one, what is this is Nico's favorite question, and I love stealing it. Which is, can you tell us one thing about your life, a fact about your life or yourself that is totally uninteresting?
I feel like I would have a harder time coming up with something that's particularly interesting. No. Totally uninteresting. I am very bad at fishing.
Did you go as a child, or is this something you've tried to do as an adult?
I've tried it a couple times, and I distinctly remember being on a fishing trip with my family. And I guess it was one of those, like, a boat takes a bunch of tourists out to go fishing. And literally, like, the people standing on either side of me were pulling up multiple fish at a time. And the entire time we were out there, I did not catch a single fish. Didn't get so much as a nibble. I tried like every different part of the boat, using the same bait as everybody else, and just something about me apparently was driving the fish away, or I just am very, very bad at it.
I think there's two possible other explanations. The first is that they were stealing your fish. The second is they were cheating.
But they came with their own fish that they were just sneaking onto the line.
Yeah. full Truman Show experiment to see what would happen, see what you'd do.
Yeah.
And now you've internalized it, those bastards.
Someone's under that boat in a scuba suit, aren't they? A big bag of fish
onto the line.
Yeah, hooking stuff onto the line. Yeah. This idea of going on fishing trips. So was this in when you were living in Canada?
Yes. So this was in Prince Edward Island, family vacation.
That sounds pretty nice. Apart from the feeling bad about not being good at a fishing thing.
I mean, my family is not like hugely into fishing or anything. I guess it was just, the fact of being on vacation in a maritime province, it seemed like the thing to do. It was still lovely to be out on the water, even though I didn't catch anything.
That's always nice, I think. Like especially at a slightly younger age, learning that you can actually have a lot of fun, even if you're not great at something, is quite an important lesson to learn.
Sort of the same attitude I always took to sports. I was, terrible at them, but I still tried out for every team, and I would play sports with my neighbors who were actually all good at sports, and I'm like, well, I'll just tag along and be terrible at it and just still have a good time.
and then occasionally when you try something, you find that you actually are quite good at it, and because you weren't afraid to try it, that's great. Now you've got something you're good at.
Exactly.
I think it's very positive.
Can't wait.
Or a whole collection of things that you're bad at, but at least you know.
Yeah, at least you know.
I'll tell you what, it's been absolutely lovely having you on so far. So we've got to plug you. We've got to get people out there knowing where they can hear more of your lovely work. Not hear it. Oh, they might be able to hear it. I don't know what you've got going on.
Some of it they can actually hear. Some of it has been podcast. So
gasp! I'm not your first.
I'm so sorry to tell you. So sorry.
So, have you got anything coming up?
I do indeed. There is Wendy Darling, which is my debut novel, which we mentioned briefly earlier. That is coming out on June 1st from Titan Books. And then later this year, I have a new short story collection called The Ghost Sequences, which is coming out from Undertow Books. That's going to be in October sometime. I'm not sure of the exact date, but appropriate ghost and haunting sort of in the Halloween month. So those are the big things this year, is the collection and the novel.
Are they going to
we're talking about short story collection.
Just are they? No more plugging for you. You can't override a
do it. I
guest
had to
spot.
make the joke. I had to do it.
Oh, are these going to be available to pre-order?
So Wendy Darling is available for pre-order now. I don't believe the pre-orders are up for the collection yet, but hopefully will be coming soon. But you can go directly to Titan Books website if you're interested in pre-ordering Wendy Darling, or it can also be found on places like Barnes & Noble, Amazon, hopefully your fine local independent booksellers as well, or request it from your local library. They can put it on their order list.
When they eventually open back up, yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like things are sort of starting to open
It's
up
coming
again,
back,
but it's slow process.
I tell you, I am looking forward to going and browsing a bookshop.
That is definitely something I miss. The
Definitely.
just walking in and finding something that you didn't know that you were looking for.
I know Nico used to work for a bookshop, and he used to do these really. He's a very good artist, and he used to do these illustrations. You know, they do the staff recommendations sometimes in bookshops. He would
Mhm.
do illustrations next to his recommendations. It was you must have increased their sales by like tenfold or something. It was always really cool.
I ran the section that was comic books, sci-fi, and fantasy because they'd obviously realised what my niche was, and yeah, it was when comic books were really on the up in terms of parents coming to get them for kids and kids starting to read them. And because a big wall of the ends of comic books can be absolutely daunting, I just thought, well, instead of making labels with words on, if you draw a picture of Deadpool, then they know exactly where Deadpool is. And end up this great big lovely colourful wall. I'll tweet some out. I'll see if I've got photos of them somewhere.
That'd be great, yeah.
But when I went back a year or so after I'd left, they had all been taken down. And when I asked, someone said, "Oh, well, someone from head office came in and they didn't like that. They didn't match the rest of the shop." So good to know
King.
creativity's dead.
That's rude.
Oh dear, just that squashing that kind of individuality is just always makes me shiver with apprehension at the world. It really does.
Now, speaking of crushing individuality, we do need to quickly get your social media information.
Actually, before we just go on to that, could I just ask you a question about your book, Wendy Darling?
Do it.
Absolutely.
I'm just so it's obviously a really fascinating idea to continue the story afterwards. What prompted that? What was the seed for that story?
It actually started off life as a flash fiction story, oddly enough, which was published originally at Daily Science Fiction in 2017. And I got a pretty positive response to sort of that initial, I think it was like just over maybe 1,500 words, or maybe even, it might have been less than that. And it kind of got me thinking, well, now I want to know the rest of the story myself. It kind of, stops at the point where Wendy's daughter has been kidnapped by Peter Pan and she's determined to go to Neverland to rescue her. And I'm like, well, now I actually want to see Wendy go on that adventure. So I guess I'm going to have to write more of it and expand it. Might be slightly a backwards way to go about writing a novel, to start with a flash fiction story, but I made it work somehow.
I think it works. I think it sounds like it works. It sounds like a wonderful concept and really enthralling.
I think that's a great way to dip your toe in and make sure you like the world you're building. And then, once you've written that little piece of flash fiction, you've got to taste a little bit of blood in your mouth.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and I just sort of thought, it's just going to be a sort of a one-off flash fiction story, not having any plans to do anything larger with it. And I just sort of got interested in the character and the story and ended up, expanding it greatly.
Brilliant. Sorry, I interrupted you, Nico.
You did, and I don't mind, because I love you dearly.
I think he's just got used to me being rude at this stage.
No. Yes. So, AC, if people want to send you lovely messages saying how much they enjoyed hearing on the show, or ask you questions about your books, where can they find you?
My website is acwise.net, which is pretty easy and straightforward. I am also on Twitter as AC_wise, and I am on Instagram as A.C.wise. Got to have them all slightly different from each other just to confuse people.
Make life nice and easy for yourself.
Exactly.
I bet they've all got different passwords as well. It's a nightmare to get into
You know, just
anywhere.
complicate everything as much as possible for
Never
everyone.
change your device. Oh, it's been
it really
amazing
has
having
been
you.
wonderful. Yeah, really nice. Yeah, I loved your story, and it was really interesting to get a peek inside your creative process and what you make of the books that you've absorbed and where you take things. It's very, very cool. Very impressed.
Well, it's been wonderful being here and great conversation. I enjoyed hearing both of your stories as well, and it's been a lot of fun.
Very kind.
If you
Very
behave
kind.
yourself, we may even invite you back. Who knows?
Now I feel like I'm being judged.
I know. It sounded like he was a 70-year-old man there, I think, handing out Werther's originals.
You won't be getting any of my bloody Werther's, boy. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of The Tiny Bookcase.
Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your chosen service so that you don't miss out on future episodes.
You can follow us on Twitter at BookcaseTiny, where you can talk to us directly and even suggest prompts for upcoming stories.
If you're not a tweeter, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram as well. Just search for The Tiny Bookcase.
Now, if you want to support the podcast,
and we'd really appreciate it if you did,
you can do so at patreon.com/thetinybookcase.
And then you could be just as special as these story seekers.
Should we thank them?
I think so.
Well, then it's a huge thank you to the legendary Matthew McLaren and the absolutely epic Scott Byrne
For their support.
Thank you for listening. Catch you next week.
Next week. Make it slimy.
Make it slimy, Nick.